everybody. My name is Doug Reeves. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on fearless grading. We're lucky to have a distinguished panel of practitioners and thought leaders on this subject. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time lecturing you. No death by PowerPoint today. It's all about interactivity. Let me just start with a couple of learning protocols, however, before we get underway. Number one, please use the chat room. If you have something on your mind, probably some of your colleagues do as well. So put your questions and your challenges in the chat room. We'll make sure that we stop whatever we're doing to address your needs right then. So please interact that way. And if you're willing to, we'll also ask you to unmute yourself and you can contribute that way. Secondly, colleagues, this is a safe place for challenges and disagreement. And I say that for a couple of reasons. If you were in a graduate class of mine, I would assign half the room to say Doug is crazy and wrong because, and the other half, maybe he's not so bad, because divergent thinking is the rocket fuel of adult learning. So I really want to tell you that it's okay to push back, okay to challenge, not only from your own perspective, but think of your colleagues, think of students, think of parents, think of community members who might disagree with some of the things you hear today. Those disagreements are absolutely welcome. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, cognitively, it's really great for all of us to hear two sides of a story. But secondly, colleagues, our country needs to see adults who disagree with each other and are still friends. So I want you to know that you can always disagree with me. You can always get a respectful response, and you'll be able to perhaps learn something from people who have a different point of view. I promise you that I'll learn as well. So I really appreciate your willingness to engage, both when you agree as well as when you disagree. So we are so lucky to be joined by a panel of distinguished experts. I'm going to start with Superintendent Myelise Tolan. Dr. Tolan has not only taught, but also led issues on grading reform. So Dr. Tolan, I'm going to begin with you. Would you please introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Reeves. My name is Myelise Tolan. I've been an educator for 20 years and I currently am the superintendent of the Lincoln County School District on the Oregon coast.
Thank you. Julie, would you please introduce yourself?
I was muted. Julia Lesnovich, I'm the assistant superintendent in Claremont Unified School District, K-12 school district just on the border of Los Angeles County.
Thank you. Jody, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Jody Anderson, and I'm an associate with Creative Leadership Solutions. This is my 24th official year in education, but since I've never left an educational setting, I guess it's a lot longer than that. And I'm coming to you from Bowling Green, Ohio.
Myelise, have I left anybody out?
I don't think so.
Okay, well,
Dr. Reeves, so everybody knows Dr. Reeves, I am moderating the chat too for you. So if there are questions, I'll be able to help out with that for you.
Thanks so much. Well, I just want to begin with a brief overview, and that is grading reform is not new. A lot of us have known, and we've read studies and we've read the research, that there are things that we can do to make positive improvements. And I guess I just want to start with a research base, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. The research base is this. Grading is just one way that we give feedback to students. And one of the things that I always ask my colleagues to do when I'm with you in schools or in districts is to think about the characteristics of the very best feedback that you've ever received. And whenever I listen to teachers and listen to administrators, they always say, well, Doug, the feedback that I've received that was really most effective was fair. That is, it was consistent across the district. If two teachers have the same kind of performance, they ought to have similar feedback. Feedback's got to be accurate. Please don't just give me this generic feedback. Tell me exactly what you observed. Come into my classroom and say, Doug, well, there were 30 kids in the classroom, 25 were on task, 5 had their heads in the desk. When I come back next week, I want to see 30 out of 30 deeply engaged. So it's got to be fair, it's got to be accurate, specific. Teachers always tell me this, Doug, don't just come into my classroom and say, you ought to have better engagement. Shoot, I knew that. I know I need better engagement. Tell me specifically how to get better. Doug, I want you to use equity sticks. I want you to do random calling. I want you to make sure that everybody, 100% of students are engaged. And I'll tell you who's great at this are our primary teachers. Man, they are fantastic at getting 100% engagement. I want to see the same thing in a high school algebra class. So it's fair, accurate, specific, and finally, timely. One of the things that teachers really complain about is when some suit comes in the back of the room and observes them and then doesn't tell them what they saw. If I'm ever lucky enough to be in one of your classrooms, colleagues, I promise you, the sun will not set without same day face-to-face feedback, and no phony baloney emails, no texts, face-to-face. Make sure that you give me the opportunity to, I'll tell you what's wrong. And we have a colleague who wrote this great article. Here's the last thing I'll say about teacher observation. She wrote this article called "What I Wish My Principal Knew." And so she was teaching this class, the principal's in the back of the room, and a kid gets up and leaves the class. First thing the principal says is, "Left class without permission." What the author said is, what I wish my principal knew is that this was a 5th grader with a UTI, urinary tract infection, had to go to the bathroom a lot. All these kids will snicker at that. So they work out a signal, got to go, okay to go. If we would have known that, that teacher would have been praised for creativity, for compassion, for empathy. So whenever I do an observation, I don't tell you what I saw. The first thing that I do is say, you saw more than I did. What did you see? So I think there's an analogy between teacher observation and student feedback, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So fair, accurate, specific, timely, that's going to be our byword for this afternoon for how we can make sure that we give students the feedback that they need. And colleagues, I've got to tell you, there's a lot of unfair and inaccurate grading practices out there. But the good news is, in our time together, you're not going to be told to do a 450-page book study. You're not going to be told to do a 5-year plan. There are specific things that you can do. This is being recorded in November of 2023. There are things that you can literally do that'll make a difference for the 2023-2024 school year rather, that will really have a positive impact on your students. And before I turn it over to Mayalise, the last thing I want to say is this. The stereotype of grading reform discussions is, well, this is just about Doug, the bleeding heart, feeling sorry for struggling kids. Colleagues, on the contrary, what we are seeing is that grading reform helps everybody. It helps, yes, the struggling 3rd grade reader, yes, the kid who's in trouble in 9th grade math, but it also helps your highest performing students. Why? Because when we get grading reform right and we reduce the DF rate, several great things happen. Number one, more electives. We're working with schools, for example, this year that have 7 new electives, including advanced courses, because they lower the DF rate. It improves behavior. 55% reduction in suspensions and office referrals because we lower the DF rate. A lot of behavioral issues, a lot of attendance issues are all about kids who feel despair and dissatisfaction. If we can give them a sense of hope because we get grading reform right, then it's going to help the entire school, every student, from the struggling reader to the valedictorian. So I want you to make sure that we carry that message across. This is not just about helping underperforming kids. It's about helping the entire school. So Mayalise, let's begin with you. Please tell us your experience.
Great, thank you. So a few years ago, I just sent out an email. I was secondary director, so my experience has been primarily at the secondary level. I sent out an email to our staff and said, who wants to try this with me? Who wants to do action research in their own classroom with a grading practice that they want to take a look at and analyze with another group of teachers? So we had 13 teachers, so it wasn't huge by any means out of the 5 secondary schools. And we had 13 that said, yeah, this is something that we want to do. So we read fast grading. They didn't get a quiz on it. I didn't test them to see if they actually read it. I gave it as a resource so that they could refer to what's fair. They could look at different examples that were in the book. And then we just got together once a month. They developed a problem of practice in their own classroom. They were very vulnerable with each other. This is something I want to try with grading. Some of their projects, some of their action research worked and some of it didn't. But 100% of it was incredibly valuable because they were willing to see what can we do about our own grading that will be better for our students. Those teachers ended up presenting to their staff, hey, this was the project I tried. And that just spurred on more and more discussion about what are we going to do about our failure rate? What are we going to do to be able to support our students? So not a single administrator had to say, this is going to change. This is what we're doing. It wasn't a top-down decision. Now all of our teachers are working on what is a project that they can do in their own classroom so that they can really test. Like, I want to get better at grading. Some are doing it by grade bands, some are doing it by departments. But it's really been awesome to watch, because I think one of the best things about education is we ask our students, take a risk, try something different with grading. And that's what we did with our teachers. And they are willing to model that for their students so that we can really, really focus on how can we be more accurate? How can we explain exactly what this grade means? We don't have everybody has to give this letter. Not everybody has to be on a rubric, although most of them actually have gone that way. But all of them realize the importance of being able to accurately explain what that grade means in regards to student performance and the standard that they're assessing. So it's been really just cool to watch their vulnerability and their improvement for our students in our district.
Well, thank you, Miley, and I especially appreciate your mentioning action research. I wish that I could come to our colleagues who are on this seminar today and report to you that the single best way to improve grading reform is an inspirational speech from Doug Reeves, but that is actually not true. It's what Mayalise just said. It is action research. People who will never believe an outside expert, never believe an author, never believe a research study. They'll believe the teacher down the hall in room 103. Hey, I tried this. This works with our culture, works with our agenda, with our budget, with our bargaining agreement. This really works right here. And that local evidence of impact, we have found, is a single best way to advance change in any sort of educational endeavor. And so I think people who do professional learning and do writing and research like this, like me, frankly, we need to take a back seat. The teachers have got to be the stars of the show. They're the ones who can say with great credibility, we tried this and this worked with us. So Julie, I'm really interested in your experience. How's it working for you to do that sort of research?
We're just kind of in our baby steps. Our first fall, I think Mahalise, her group is a little bit further down the road than us. We've been talking about equitable grading practices for a long time, but that's where it ends, right? Just lots of talk and no
Yes.
action. And really looking at some inappropriate practices that have just been in place over decades. Having the discussions of what a 0 really means. And if we're going to hand kids letter grades, is it a true, like you said, fair representation of what they know in the content? Or is it not fair? And, I know I was in a situation years ago with my daughter where she got a 0 on a test because she was caught talking. And I said to the teacher, well, I can't by law, change that practice, but it is your job to give me and my daughter fair and accurate, let her know how she's doing in her class. And by you throwing the test in the trash, that doesn't tell either one of us anything. So I wouldn't say that was a fair practice, but what we ended up doing is we've had standards-based report cards for years at the elementary level, but I wouldn't say that we do. We do, but we don't, because the teachers are still grading. They'll still grade a math test and assign it a percentage. And then instead of calling it a B, they give it a 3 because it's from an 80 to an 89%. And they've just kind of decided that an 80 to an 89% is a 3. So we really haven't gotten away from those practices, but they're finally starting to have those conversations at the elementary level. We're going to be doing some collaborative grade level meetings and looking at grading practices. It's my secondary group who has begun the action research. And like Mahalise, we have one comprehension high school, one middle school, and one alternative ed. And we have about 15 teachers who, by their choice, have chosen to go down this path. And I think that's a really great way to start it. But one thing that took a couple of meetings to convince them is they all came to the first meeting, right? And they look around the room and they start having the conversation of equitable grading practices. And they said, the wrong people are in the room. We're the folks doing this already. They're the innovators, right? They're like the folks that need to have this conversation aren't in the room. And so it took a couple of meetings to get them to understand that, no, we do, because this needs to come from all of you. This needs to be these phenomenal teachers that are sitting here to go back and show them the evidence in their classrooms that this is working. This is changing the environments on our school. And share, and more importantly, let them know that it's doable. They can get away from the norm that they're used to doing. They just need to see it. So I think that also armed them with that confidence of we can be the game changers. But we're only a few meetings in, a few months in, and so I'm super excited. Next month they'll actually be choosing their projects in their classrooms. So super excited to see what the future holds for us.
Julie, you said a couple of really important things that I would just like to amplify, and that is, there's this fundamental question of what is the purpose of grading? And a lot of people think, well, the purpose of grading is to just evaluate. But our view is the purpose of grading is to give feedback to improve performance. It's just like the purpose of teacher evaluation. It's not just an evaluation, it's to give feedback to improve performance. That's what all of us as educators want. Similarly for students, it's how do I know how to get better? And I'm agnostic about whether we're talking about letters or numbers. Honestly, that's a side issue. The issue is, how do I get better? And how do I use the feedback that my teacher gave me or my administrator gave me to get better? And the other thing, Julie, that I thought you said that was so profoundly important is that the right people have to be in the room. So to the administrators who are participating in this seminar, I'm appealing to you. Our teachers are willing to take risks, but only if you've got their back. As Julie so thoughtfully said, we've got to have the administrators, that's the building administrators, the district administrators, in these discussions so they know you've got their back. If they try something experimental, do it. Finally, I'll just say that you kind of reminded me, Julie, is when I go to boards, I'm not asking for a new 20-page grading policy. I'm not asking for a 450-page book study. I'm asking for a fair experiment. Are you willing to let us try something, as you so thoughtfully said, that will allow us to say, hey, here's how we've done it in the past. Can we try an experiment and then evaluate the impact? And every blooming time we have done this, better discipline, better attendance, better classroom climate and culture, more electives, fewer DFs, all these great things happen. But I've got to have your permission to just do a fair experiment first. Not a new policy, just a fair experiment. Jody, what's your experience?
Dr. Reeves, I would echo what Julie and Mylise and you have shared is as administrators, the change models that we have seen work definitely come through the hard work of the teacher champions. And these may be teachers that are the ones that are coming to you as an administrator, or maybe one of your colleagues that's sharing that, you know what, I'm struggling with, I have students that have all these missing assignments and it's destroying their grade, or homework just doesn't seem to be functioning for me for a lot of different reasons. And so having those teacher champions that are going to share with their colleague, these are the successes that I had. I can think of teachers that I sought out that I knew were well respected by their peers, who were champions for the work. And that's like magic. Having them to communicate, those are the people you want in the room. And they're not always the ones that have the loudest voice. They're quietly doing wonderful things perhaps, and they're not super excited about being in maybe a leadership or an influencing role. So it may take some effort on your part to convince them that this is so worthwhile. And so I think that's part of what has been really successful is hearing it from your colleagues and seeing the most powerful evidence of that, which is in your school with your students, using your culture.
Thank you so much. And several of you have mentioned action research. Let me just provide some very clear parameters about what that means. We call it colloquially the science fair for adults. And it looks like a fourth grade science fair, 3-panel displays, $2.59 at Office Max, no real money here. And all of them have the same titles. The left hand is, what was my challenge? Maybe it's attendance, maybe it's 3rd grade math, maybe it's 9th grade math scores. You let the teachers choose. What was my challenge? The middle panel, what was my practice? What specifically did I do as a professional to influence that challenge? The right-hand panel, what were my results? And we're not talking multivariate calculus here. It's before and after. Here's where we started, here's where we ended. Very clear analysis of results. And colleagues, I'm telling you, that is what persuades teachers and parents and board members and community members that what you do really matters. I want to linger on this for just a minute, and then I want to invite Elise to see if there's things in the chat room. And here's why. We lost a bunch of people in our profession in the last 3 years because they left school thinking, gee, I don't know if I make a difference. I don't know if I'm having an impact. If you'll do this science fair idea, what's my challenge? What's my practice? What are my results? You will leave in May or June of 2024 knowing that every teacher made a difference. They will leave with a spring in their step. Hey, I watched these kids get better. And by the way, it's not all just quantitative in terms of test scores getting better. It's qualitative as well. We saw this amazing school where one of their biggest problems was literacy. And part of the research that I've tried to contribute to, along with Karen Chenoweth, Steve Graham, many others, is if you want to get better literacy, you have better student writing, particularly nonfiction writing. And so what they did is to post, obviously with no names, same kid to same kid comparison, September, October, November. And you'd see this wretched writing that was just unlegible, unrecognizable in September, get better and better and better, longer and longer, more complex, more arguments, more citations. It's the same kid with the same parents, the same nutrition, the same family, the same attendance, same everything. The only difference was the classroom teacher. If you want your teachers to leave in May or June of 2024 knowing I made that difference, then show them the opportunity to get better and better and better. It's one of the most powerful things that you can do. And if we want to restore our profession and have people that will stay in our profession rather than leave, they've got to know that they made a difference. That's one of the most basic things that we can do in what we call the science fair to let teachers know that they're getting better. The other thing, the appeal that I would make to administrators, and then Elise, I'm going to go to you for the chat room, is sometimes we try to over-engineer this. And here's some lessons that I learned from teachers. What we're tempted to do is to just default to what are the test scores before and after. But what I saw some amazing teachers do is to say, well, wait a minute, the real problem in math is not just comparing math scores. The real problem is perseverance and persistence. When they see a multi-step math problem, do they just give up because it's too complicated, or do they persevere? So these teachers brilliantly measured their degree of perseverance. Even if you don't complete the whole thing, do you at least get to step 1, to step 2, to step 3? It was brilliant. And if you'll trust teachers to identify what the challenge is, you'll get better and better and better. That's one of the best things that you and I can do as educators and as leaders. So, Elise, what do we have in the chat room?
Well, we don't have anything in the chat room yet, but if you don't mind, Dr. Reeves, I'd like to kind of use this opportunity with one of my own questions that I have faced when working in a district I worked in with you about science fair, and the skepticism that started in our first session when it came to science fair. And will people take this seriously? What will this really look like? And what I will tell you is, as that year went on, we started in September, we did a science fair in May with the same group of teachers. We had a K-12 group, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Reeves, I think we had around 75 educators in the room each time. We did 4 science fairs back to back to back. It was a 3-hour-long science fair. And even I, with that big of a group, was a little skeptical and said, Doug, do you really think we will be able to keep them engaged in a science fair for 3 hours? Now, obviously, he's traveled the country doing science fairs. And he said, yeah, it's not going to be a problem. We won't get them to stop talking. They're going to keep talking. And I had done it, on a smaller scale. And I thought, okay, well, we'll see how this goes. And he was right. We had to make them take a break. We had to tell them at the end that they needed to go back and sit down. And this was K-12. And our secondary teachers were just as engaged at a kindergarten bulletin or poster board, science fair board about how we can get kindergartners proficient in reading as they were at a secondary board over how we're going to get students to improve their writing in an AP social studies class. And it was like that for all 4 science fair sessions with that many people, giving teachers that opportunity to have the administrators in the room, the presenters in the room, step back and let them talk about equitable grading practices and the changes that they have seen happen was far more powerful than if Dr. Reeves would have presented at them every single session. One person didn't even know who he was. They were like, the guy in the bow tie came over and he asked me this question. It was like, yeah, he did. But it was incredibly powerful to just let them talk about what they needed
Absolutely.
to do to drive equitable grading practices.
So Dr. Tolan, you got to let the teachers be the stars of the show. We have to stop the conceit that the outside expert is what drives change. It's the inside experts that drive change. It's teachers who show this works. And you know, one of the great things is that we have had great union cooperation, because when they know that we're working within the bargaining agreement, we're working within the parameters that are already established, you know, that's respect, and teachers demand respect. I think the other thing that I would add is that you know, it's not a one size fits all. I'm, as I said, agnostic about letters versus numbers. You know, what you want to do is make sure that you respect the local culture and focus on the values, common values of fairness, of accuracy. You don't need a 450-page book. You just need a commitment to common values of accuracy and fairness. That's what really works. And people really appreciate that local level of respect and local level of, you know, I'm going to watch my colleague be successful. I'll let you jump in if we have comments in the chat room, but let me just address a couple of other things. I think one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is that there's a lot of ink spilled rather on grading practices. Frankly, what we do in education is we take simple things and make them complicated. What I tell my colleagues at Creative Leadership Solutions is our job is to make complicated things and make them simple. So, for example, you don't need to argue about the zero. And by the way, this is all my fault. I'm the one who wrote the article, The Case Against the Zero. I still get hate mail about that 22 years later. Look, you want to give zeros, go for it. Just don't use the average. If you want to take one big idea away from today's discussion, it is if you stop using the average, the zero doesn't matter. If you stop using the average, numbers versus letters don't matter. The whole idea is we evaluate the students on how they finish the race, not how they start. So we're coming into December. Many of you are going to have probably some wonderful holiday music concerts. And here's my request for anybody who thinks that the average is a good idea. When those kids knock it out of the park in these December concerts, I want you to sit on your hands and don't you dare applaud, because they sounded pretty lousy in September and August. If you believe in the average, you would, if you believe in the average, you'd always punish kids for the mistakes that they made 3 or 4 months ago. Now, when I put it in that context, it's crazy talk, but that's exactly what happens. Similarly, let's fast forward to next May when the state track champions are going to happen. And you're going to have a student who ran a 4-minute, 15-second mile, and she won the state track championship. Now, I want you to imagine that she's on the podium, just about ready to get her gold medal, and somebody taps her on the shoulder and says, "Sorry, kid, you fell over a few hurdles in February. We're going to take that gold medal away." If you believe in the average, that's what we're doing. So if you want to take away just one big idea, you don't need a 450-page book study. Just stop using the average. It's the most important thing that we can do. Now, back to what my Elise said about homework. I know what you're thinking, but Doug, if we don't use the average, then what would happen if a kid didn't turn in work, and then finishes at the top? All that tells you is whatever they weren't turning in wasn't relevant. So seriously, we got to stop using the average, start evaluating students the way that our country has supposedly been doing this for 25 years, and evaluate them on the same way that we do brain surgeons and pilots and drivers, how they finish, not how they start.
Dr. Reed?
Yes.
We did have a question in the chat, and they've asked to be able to see an example or a picture of one of the Trifold Science Fair posters. I don't know if you have one you can pull up. I was able to find one. I can share screen if you'd like. And you can
sure.
it.
Please do. I do have a number of them, but my, and as you're pulling it up, my Elise, I would just say, colleagues, keep it simple. I've seen these things done with magic marker. They are not fancy. My rule is no glitter, no PowerPoint. Just tell me, what's my challenge? What's my practice? What's my result? Keep it really simple. So go ahead, Miley's.
I'm trying here. Let's see. I've got it through a different, everyone can see how terrible I am at organization of any sort of slide or anything. Okay. Let's see here.
But
Can you see it?
great. Oh, excellent. Thank you so
I
much.
can see on my side stuff too. Let's see. Okay. Am I able to make it very big at all for you? It's just a picture of one. I think that's as big as I can make it. Close everything else. How about now?
That's better. Thanks.
There we go. Are there any questions about that? People can come off mute or in the chat box.
And while you're thinking about that, I'll just narrate some that I've seen. And part of it, and this is why we need our administrators to back up our teachers on this. For example, there was in California a third grade class that went from 32% on grade level to 74%. But what they got was not only effective instruction, but they also got more time from the administrators. A part of it, and I'm appealing to you administrators, give us more time. We need more time to get kids back on grade level, because a lot of the students have been way underperforming, and it's going to take us some time to get caught up. A Connecticut study on mathematics. Math has been a huge issue around the country. The site administrator was willing to give the teachers more time on math. I was a math teacher in middle school, and you send me kids who can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide, I'll teach them algebra, but probably not in one period a day. I need more time. And I know that's politically really challenging for you to give more time to literacy and math, which means less time for other areas. But I'll tell you what, if we don't do that, we're going to have a lot of kids who are not there. Here's the data point to take away from today's discussion. 1.3 million students who were here in 2019 are not here today. I was in a meeting last week in California with 22 superintendents. Every single one of them is suffering declining enrollment. If we don't get our kids back in school, and if we don't have them successful, we're not only going to have a higher dropout rate, but we're going to have kids who are going to be dependent upon us for years. So colleagues, here's the bottom line. The student attrition that we are seeing is not a 2023 problem, it's a 2073 problem. Those kids who do not come back to school are facing a lifetime of unemployment, of poverty, of excessive use of the medical care system, of the criminal justice system. So I'm really asking the leaders and the policymakers on this call to give teachers the time that they need to be successful. If we don't, we're going to lose them. And the pushback you're going to get is, oh, but if I give them extra literacy in math, they won't take electives. You want to know who doesn't take electives? The kids who don't come to school. So seriously, you got to give them the time, give our teachers the time that they need, starting early and all the way through high school.
Great. So we have two comments. One is just it was a message that I received that some kids have never heard that the teacher believes that they can do it. And I think that that's an excellent point, that sadly there are kids who haven't heard that. So how can we set them up for that belief and show them this is going to be the next thing that you do. You can do this, and now this is the next thing that you will be able to do. So thank you for that message. And then Dr. Reeves, another question. How do administrators incentivize this action research for teachers who feel tapped?
Yeah, let me address the first one first. With respect to helping students get to the next level, the issue that I always raise is, so those kids who think that they can't do it, do they play video games? 99.9% of them do. And they play video games because they know that even if they die at the end of those games, which they always do, they can get to the next level. And that's the terminology that students use. I can get to the next level. I get feedback. I want to have a math class that has students say, I can get to the next level. I can get to the next level. With respect to, the other issue, I know that there's people of goodwill who disagree on these things, but I just want to suggest, what's the alternative? The alternative is we are going to be closing schools in this country. We're going to be laying off tenured teachers. If we don't get a handle on getting kids back in school and getting kids to be successful, we will lose kids and we will lose schools and we will lose teachers. So we really have to consider not only the vision of what we want for our future students, but the vision of what's going to happen if we fail to do that. And I think sometimes we're guilty of not articulating the negative vision that is facing us right now in American education.
Dr. Reeves, can I jump in too on the question of incentivizing? Because that's hard, right? There's so much on our teachers' plates, and it seems like every year, at least here in California, there's more put on their plate. We never take anything away. And so time is precious. So ensuring that teachers that are doing this research, that are willing to do it, to give them the time. For instance, there's days we have our facilitator coming out and she's just there to be there, to meet with the teachers, support them. So it'd be really easy for me to save money and do roving subs, right? But instead I say, no, all of you get a full day sub and use that time how you see fit to help advance you in the work that you're doing. So they appreciate that. And then I also think just stressing that you have the freedom to be innovative. Oftentimes our teachers, they want to be innovative, but they also don't want to get their hands slapped. They're afraid of what happens if they fail. And, this is the kind of work that even if they fail, it doesn't harm kids, right? We're trying new things, we're adapting, we're tweaking. And so really trying to give teachers the freedom to try new things and so they know that, all right, they've got my back. I can do this. And my principal supports me. The district office supports me in the work that I'm doing, I think is super important to communicate to them when you're recruiting.
So, Julie, you have raised the incredibly important issue of initiative fatigue. Teachers are burned to a cinder. And we're not going to keep people in our profession, either as administrators or as teachers, if we don't make this a livable occupation. So let me, if I could be so bold, particularly after I said negative things about homework, give you some a homework assignment. And that is, I want administrators to write a list of what you think your initiatives are, and then ask your teachers to do the same thing. Colleagues, I have done this a bunch of times, and every time the teacher's list is way longer than the administrator's list. And there's no malice here. Everybody's trying to do the right thing. So to our superintendents who are listening, they've got your initiatives and your predecessors' initiatives and your predecessors' initiatives. It's crazy. Teachers feel crushed. In the research that I did for a book called Finding Your Leadership Focus, I looked at 2,000 plus school plans. And here's the bottom line. Michael Fullen wrote the introduction to this, and he said, the number of initiatives that a school has is inversely proportional to gains in student achievement. I looked at gains in student achievement over the course of 3 years, elementary, middle, and high school. And once they got more than about 6, achievement dropped like a stone. And so I really want you to think about, how do you really pare down, as Julie so thoughtfully suggested, the number of initiatives that we have and focus on 6. You want to do 7, I won't argue with about that. But when you get to 20, 30, 40, as many of these schools did, you might as well give up. Teachers are just crushed under that. So we have to focus on a few things and then implement them very deeply. The other study that I did that you might find of some value is that when you go from different levels of implementation, by the way, here is where good researchers admit when they're all wrong. I was so totally wrong about this. I hypothesized that with each level of increased engagement, increased implementation, then student achievement would get better. Colleagues, I was so blooming wrong. You go from level 1 to level 2, nothing happened. Level 2 to level 3, nothing happened. Level 3 to level 4, great gains in student achievement. But the problem is nobody gets to level 4 because after level 1, 2, 3, they say, well, shoot, that program didn't work. Let's go buy another initiative. Level 1, 2, 3. Well, that one didn't work either. Let's go buy another initiative. So I'm asking you to please focus on a few things that'll get you all the way to the deepest level of implementation. That is evidence of impact, which is what Elise was talking about earlier. Evidence of impact on student achievement. If you're not going there, then don't bother. I really worry that teachers are crushed under initiative fatigues. And because we had a bunch of federal funds in the last few years, we bought a bunch of stuff that is not being implemented. And it's up to the leaders and the administrators to pull the plug and say, enough. What else do we have, Elise?
I think that's it. There's another, or so far, there is another comment too on just making sure that teachers have that honoring and valuing that they have the capacity to get to that next level, that encouragement to keep going, and that you might not get there that first second that you try something, but that they need to know that they can get there too.
Well, we're at 45 minutes, which is our stopping time. So let me just conclude with a couple of things. First of all, my deep thanks to my colleagues, to Elise, to Jody, to Julie, and also to all of you. I know your time is valuable as well, and I really appreciate the fact that you spent time with us. The other thing is that we will send you a follow-up email. One of the things that we believe at Creative Leadership Solutions is that drive-by professional learning does not work. So I put my personal phone number on there. I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but I've seen a thing or two. And so if you're willing to connect with me and say, well, Doug, you really ought to be talking to the 9th grade math department. You really ought to be talking to the 3rd grade team. Please take me up on that. If I can help you and I can support you, you know you can do that. You'll never get a bill for it. We really appreciate your commitment and your engagement, and we'll support you however we can. My more than 60 colleagues at Creative Leadership Solutions are also available to support you as well. There's also, I should have mentioned at the outset, some free resources. If you go to creativeleadership.net, there's videos, there's tools, there's articles, there's research. It's all free. You can all take advantage of that. I will not ask for a show of hands about doctoral candidates who are on the 10-year plan, but I also have a volunteer group called Finish the Dissertation. If that's you, a family member, a loved one, a colleague working on their dissertation, we help you free one-to-one coaching to get across the finish line. I just did this last Friday. It was so much fun because all these wonderful, brilliant doctoral candidates are trying to write 10 dissertations, and they're all going to great universities, but you know what? You only need one. And we want to help you get one-to-one coaching to cross that finish line. If we can help you with finishthedissertation.org or creativeleadership.net, we'll be sure to help you. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks to my colleagues for participating.